right, welcome back to the Unqualified for Space podcast with me, Michael Hodges. My next guest on the show is Mr. Sean Mitchell. You might know him from videos on YouTube regarding EVs and Tesla. Or if you're in the Denver area and looking for a house, he's your man. How you doing today, Sean? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, and excited to chat with you a little bit about tech and innovation and whatever else comes up.
All right. Well, I'd like to start off first with what interests you about space.
Well, I'll say first off that I follow it, but I follow it not super closely. I think generally speaking, it's really exciting to see the privatization of space. So as someone who runs his own business and looks at opportunities to grow business and capitalize on
Mhm.
opportunities, space is a really, really interesting one. And so it's something that we're seeing unfold as we speak. And this is an exciting innovation that we're seeing in business and in companies investing billions of dollars
Mhm.
to create opportunity for people.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of people today, I think, believe that space is not something we should be focusing on. They think, it should only be the climate, or it should only be tech innovation, or it should only be, EV adoption. But so I wanted to ask your thoughts on why do you think space is important and why we should be focusing or not focusing on that?
Well, it seems like there are some business opportunities in space, and I think that that's one reason why it should be focused on. There's opportunities to um, improve humanity, benefit humanity, create opportunities. I know Elon Musk is really big on being a multiplanetary species.
Hmm.
Um, who knows what the future will hold for Earth and those who live on Earth? And it's not a terrible idea. And if it can be made, if it can be done economically and sustainably, why not? Why not do it?
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of the things in tech or just in general, things that affect humanity are come from space. Our experiments on the ISS, the space station, have done anything from cell phones to computers to what have you. So it's definitely a period or a thing I think we should personally focus on.
I think, yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. And I've often thought about how we as consumers benefit from investments made into space, which I think is what you were referring to.
Hmm.
The technology, the cameras, satellites, these are all things that we've benefited from because governments have invested the money into advancing this. So who knows what the next iteration of consumer products will be because of the investments made in space. I'm sure there's some people tracking this a lot closer than I am, but
Hmm.
you got to believe that with those investments and the advancement and the innovations required to be in space, that's going to trickle down to consumer products, make our lives better, and hopefully make us happier.
Yeah, I think that it makes me happier at least. So that's important. But yeah, it's just I get the feeling from a lot of people that, obviously space is expensive. There's no way that you can get to space relatively cheaply. I mean, Elon's doing his best to make that happen, among other people like Peter Beck from Rocket Lab and things like that. But it's still going to be an enormous cost no matter what we look at it. But some people I think view that as like a non-starter, just the initial cost of it.
Well, you can't make decisions on where to invest money because it's expensive. You
Hmm.
have to look at the long-term game. You have to understand what is the long-term benefit. There may be short-term benefit, but a lot of things that are valuable to people, whether that's technology or products or relationships, require long-term investment. If you have a significant other, you're married, you have a spouse, it's long-term investment, right? It
Mhm.
takes a lot of work to see the rewards of that. The same thing for my real estate business. There was a lot of toiling in the very beginning, not seeing a lot of return, but investing a lot of time. And I suspect that space is going to be the same way. Um, it's going to require a lot of investment upfront. It will seem expensive, but I think big picture, you want the long-term return to be greater than that initial investment that's being made.
Mhm. Yeah, so the idea of going to Mars and other planetary bodies, hopefully in the future, eventually, in the first part, it's going to be enormously expensive. It's going to cost billions just to get the ship there, and then once they get the travel down to what you can say an everyday person would be able to afford, probably still going to be in the $200,000 plus range for per person. Do you think that that's something that a lot of people will do if they can have that money to be able to afford something like that? Or do you think the cost of that will stop a lot of people from traveling?
I think it depends on how sustainable and enjoyable it is to live on another planet. It's like it's got to be. You're going to have the early adopters
Hmm.
who are just going to do it because they like risk. They have a high risk tolerance or a spirit of adventure,
Hmm.
and they want to be some of the first to colonize a new planet. But it I think it depends on how livable it's going to be and enjoyable long term. Um, I would assume that someone is thinking about these things and how to make it sustainable and livable. Water and food are probably going to be some of the most important things to establish
Hmm.
once colonized. So possibly, but that's that's it's probably a ways off. I don't know how far, and you probably have a better insight, but it's probably a little ways off for us to see the material benefit and appeal of living on another planet. I, we could probably liken it to when people from Europe came over to America.
Hmm.
It was very primitive, very rural, and there was a lot of risk. There was a lot of death, and there
Hmm.
was a lot of it was probably not a very luxurious lifestyle that people were living as they were coming over on boats. So it's probably very similar, I would imagine.
Yeah, the first few years of Mars life or anywhere else is going to be pretty rough. I don't think the majority of people will probably want to struggle, and it's going to be a struggle. I mean, anybody who thinks differently is kind of naive, I believe, on that.
Right, right. I totally agree. But I'm excited to follow it. I'm
Hmm.
excited to see, uh, as a business person and a solo entrepreneur. I think that it's really interesting to see the evolution of this technology. And there's a big part of me that is sort of a rooting for the underdog in this, rooting for the people who are taking the risk, making the investments, and maybe some people fail, maybe some people don't make it in
Hmm.
terms of businesses, but if the opportunity is great enough, I think some people are going to take that risk. And so eventually it will happen, and it's just fascinating to me to follow people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos who are challenging normal convention
Hmm.
to say, you know what, there is some upside here. There's also some risk, but I'm okay with the risk. And I'm going to invest some of my personal wealth into seeing this through because the upside is greater than the downside.
So if travel to, let's just say Mars, because that's probably where the focus is going to be for another planetary body besides the moon, was as easy as you coming to Florida from your Denver area, would you do it?
I think so, but again, it really depends on what's there. What
Hmm.
am I going to go there for? Am I going to go there to go experience Mars Disneyland? And is there are there some sort of um, uh, attractions that are there to go experience? Is it going to be a, you know, an adventure, off-road adventure to somewhere on Mars? There's got to be something appealing about it that would tempt me to go. You know, if we're talking about $200,000, it's probably initially still a wealthy man's safari
Hmm.
to Mars. So I don't know. I suppose it depends on where I'm at in life, financially, when that opportunity arises. But you know, at some point, it's probably going to look a lot like air travel. It was very expensive initially. It was for wealthy people, and then over decades, it became, you know, far more affordable. And now you see today you can get a flight almost anywhere in the U.S. for, you know, between $100 and $200.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely get there. And it might take quite a few years of, orders of magnitude of improvement, but at some point we will get there. It's just inevitable.
Yeah, I would want to. I mean, there's going to be some entrepreneurs that go to Mars and figure out how to monetize
Oh yeah.
monetize the opportunity, and then it creates this competition, and competition and scale will reduce price and hopefully make it far more affordable than $200,000 in the long term. But I'm curious to follow that's one thing I can say for sure. I'm extremely curious to follow the pace of innovation
Hmm.
with what happens. What are people saying in terms of first flights? We're talking like 5 years, right?
Yeah, it all honestly depends on who you ask. Depends on how bullish or bearish, if you want to do stock market kind of terms, on space they are. But SpaceX in particular is shooting for a 2024 as the first date. Other
Hmm.
people are saying 2030. Just depends.
Hmm. It's exciting. It's definitely exciting. There's plenty of other content creators out there that cover what companies like SpaceX are doing, and they do a great job. Tim Dodd, Everyday Astronaut, I think he's
Hmm.
doing a really fantastic job. He really seems to, from an outsider looking in, have a good understanding about the technical aspects of rockets and space. And I have a huge appreciation for people like him. I had a chance to meet him at a conference that I was at, Fully Charged Live, at the beginning of February in Austin, Texas.
Hmm.
And super nice guy. Have a lot of respect for what he does.
Yeah, I was able to meet him there as well, and I think he did a really good talk on pollution and rockets and how people kind of are. It's a misnomer as to how much it pollutes the air and things like that.
Yeah, talk about that, because I didn't get to hear his session. So what were some of the high level points that he made about that?
Well, basically, a lot of people believe that because of how much, excuse me, of how much people see when the rocket goes up, this huge exhaust plume that comes out of it. And it's, understandable that people are like, well, all these rockets are polluting the air in a massive amount just because of the amount of fuel they have to use and things. But in reality, it's like 0.0089% of global emissions. And he compared a lot of that to the airline industry, which is, I think, 2% at best of global emissions. So it's just an education, just like EVs. A lot of people don't understand the technical aspects of it. So therefore they just, everything's just a blanket. Oh, I can see this way, so it must be the worst thing. And it's just not accurate.
Yeah, probably a lot of education required. And
Hmm.
especially for someone like me who doesn't follow it closely, you could just read a headline and get an impression, or grab
Exactly. Yeah.
onto that and make that your belief. But as you said, naive belief.
Hmm.
And you know, electric vehicles is very similar. If you don't follow it closely and you just follow the headlines, you could believe some misnomers about the industry, and really grab onto that.
Hmm. Because a lot of people, especially on the initial like engine ignition on the stand or the pad that it's on, they use a ton of water in order to dampen sound because it's obviously extremely loud. So a lot of people see this huge just cloud at first and don't realize that's 99% water and steam because it's all just white, you know. But people obviously think, oh, it's just a huge cloud of whatever gas, and that's just not accurate.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that, but um, makes sense.
Hmm.
Makes a lot of sense.
So I wanted to ask a lot of people, you're heavily into the EV game on YouTube, and we're both Tesla owners. You know, we're not paid by Tesla no matter what people think online. A lot of people follow one particular company or another, depending on what they like. You know, some people only follow SpaceX because of how they're doing, some people only follow Blue Origin. Do you believe that people should be more bipartisan in the space game, just like they should be in the EV game?
You know, if I apply the same lens to EVs, if I apply the same lens to space as I do EVs, why not? More should be better, especially in a very early stage
Hmm.
where a lot of development and innovation is happening. You are going to have some companies who won't make it, but you'll also have some companies that will be the legacy, space travel companies in 50 to 100 years. But it requires entrepreneurs to take that risk, make that investment, and there will always be people like that. So I do think it's important, especially early on, to encourage as much investment into a new industry as possible, because that's the only way really that you accelerate the innovation. And hopefully, along with that innovation comes cost competitiveness,
Hmm.
driving down prices, price wars, and being competitive on that, finding ways to make the business more efficient. So it really does need to be. And there's so many examples of industries who were in early stages of investment that we all benefit from today. Automobiles is another one. I mentioned planes,
Hmm.
automobiles, almost any form of transportation, technology like televisions and phones. Those all started off as very expensive, wealthy people's enjoyments. And the wealthy people find. I was just talking about this with some Tesla owners that were over at my house last night. Different context, but um, wealthy people financed a lot of what we all enjoy today
Hmm.
because they helped fund the innovation and the economies of scale.
Yeah, because a lot of people, just like anything, they camp in one particular aspect or another. And I'm just a fan of space in general. So while I have my preferred people that I might want to follow, I believe that anybody that's getting us there should be taken seriously, whether they're, you know, failing or not failing. As long as they're trying, I'm in the camp of I applaud them for that.
That's great. So I know of, just following it from afar, you've got SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic. Are there some other ones that are prominent or promising?
Yeah, the Rocket Lab out of New Zealand. Peter Beck is the CEO. They're focusing more on the small satellite market because their rockets are physically smaller. But the advantage of them is they don't have to ride share. They can have a dedicated rocket per their payload, which enables them to have a very particular orbit that they're put into. And that's one thing that Rocket Lab is being known for is the margin of error on orbit is very, very small. Whereas, you know, SpaceX might have to ride share 60 satellites at one time, and each individual one then has to go to their particular orbit, which isn't as, you know, on the spot as the one that Rocket Lab might be doing.
Super cool. Really exciting.
And there's also United Launch Alliance, which does a lot of the government satellite contracts and things like that.
Right. In terms of space travel, though, who Who besides SpaceX is working on something that challenging?
The only one I could really say that is on par with trying to get people out to like travel besides just NASA astronauts, just like your everyday people would probably be Blue Origin.
Wow. So it's a very small exclusive group of people.
Yeah, so far, yeah. There's other people that are trying with, things regarding space once we're like in places, but as far as getting us there, those are the only two as of right now.
Well, hopefully more come soon.
Yeah, I don't know how long that'll be because just the amount of money it takes, like we were talking about before. But I think once it's opened up, then a lot more people may follow because then there'll just be other opportunities to have.
Well, if you compare it to what we're seeing with electrification of automobiles, it it might follow a similar path.
Hmm.
Tesla took a really huge risk by going all in, developing their own technology. There were no suppliers. There were no electric vehicle suppliers.
Hmm.
They had to cobble together their own technology at the time and build their own electric vehicle that was really compelling. There were electric vehicles before Tesla, but I think Tesla created the first compelling electric vehicle. And all of these traditional automakers just watched, and
Hmm.
some of them jeered Tesla and jabbed them, and many journalists and media said that Tesla wouldn't make it, or most likely wouldn't make it. And Tesla took the biggest risk of all. And now what we're seeing are things like what GM did a week ago, where they
Hmm.
had an electric vehicle day where they spent 2 hours talking about what they've been working on with electrification, their battery technology, their electric motors, their future lineup of electric vehicles, and how committed they are. We've seen even things from Ford where they are putting out a all electric SUV Mustang,
Hmm.
and companies like VW now are talking about how electric is the future. But it took a company, a single company, to really take that risk. And then once that company proved the business model, it lowered the barrier to entry, not only by proving the business model, but also these traditional companies are benefiting from the cost of batteries falling for these electric vehicles. And and so my guess is it space will probably follow a similar path, in that you have a small handful of companies who take the risk, prove the business model that it can be economically sustaining, and then it will encourage other people to make the investments as well.
Yeah, because there's massive amounts of minerals and things on asteroids or other planets that we could harvest. So I think that private industry will be the one to colonize space because of that fact. There's so many minerals and things, and honestly, trillions and maybe even more dollars worth of stuff we could go mine out in the asteroid belt and beyond that even. So I think it'll be. I don't think it necessarily will be governments. I think it'll be private industry that will colonize space.
Right. And I mean, who's to say that we've discovered everything that's on Mars?
Mhm.
Could there be some could there be some things there that we don't know about, that entrepreneurs and businesses could capitalize on and create the next industry or the next product that we haven't thought about yet?
Yeah, it's entirely plausible. I mean, we've had what, like 4 rovers that have actually made it there in the last 30 years. It's one thing a lot of people don't understand, and it might be getting too technical, is that getting to Mars is very hard. Like landing on it in particular is extremely hard. So that's something that I think a lot of people may not understand. But we have like 4 rovers there in the past like 30 years, and I might be wrong on that. But and even then, we've explored probably less than 1% of the entire planet, even with our satellites orbiting it all the time. So just like the ocean on Earth here, we haven't explored 75% of the ocean. So what's to know about Mars yet?
Right, and that I've heard from people, uh, opponents of space exploration, is we don't even know a lot of our own planet Earth.
Hmm.
So why should we be investing in space? So I see both angles, and you know, deep sea is an interesting one, and there's
Hmm.
probably some things down there that we don't yet understand that could potentially benefit the human race.
Yeah, I think there's discoveries on in either direction you could go that would benefit humanity, whether it's, down in the deepest parts of the ocean here or out in space to try and study the origins of how we came about and things like that.
Let's do it all. I mean, why not? If there's people who are willing to take the risk, make the investment, and explore it, um, we don't know until we do it. And as I said before, there will be people who will fail, and you know, opponents who will say, "See, I told you so.
Hmm.
I told you we shouldn't have done that." But then someone comes along and continues to sort of chip away at that traditional convention, and then discovers the next big thing.
It's just like the unfortunate disasters we have had in space where, space shuttle had two instances where it blew up. The Russians have had problems in their early days of the space program. So failure is inevitable. I mean, with anything, plenty of people failed coming to colonize the new world at the time. So I think I put it into that same concept that we're going to fail, but should that stop us? No, I don't think so.
100%. Totally agree.
So I want to ask your opinion on reusability when it comes to space. Do you think that it's better to just launch a rocket and throw it away? Or should it be obvious that we should be making reusability the most important factor in that?
Well, I mean, to me, in my perspective, it seems like an easy softball question here. Of course, there should be reusability, and especially if you want to if you want to get to economies of scale, you have to figure that out. And it seems like this is possible, and to some extent, SpaceX has really paved the way for this. I think they've been the trailblazer in
Hmm.
this idea of reusability. So it makes sense, especially if you want to get consumer space travel, if you want to make that a thing. So absolutely, and why not? If that's the way to drive down the cost, it just seems incredibly wasteful that prior to what SpaceX is doing now, that the 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 standard practice was to launch rockets and then just let them sink into the ocean.
Hmm.
Um, and Elon Musk has used this analogy many times about airline travel. Imagine if we flew on a commercial plane once, and then just junked it. That would be It's just insanity. And so what surprises me, though, is that it's gone decades that the space industry has taken this approach of one-time use rockets. And um, I'm curious as to why someone didn't challenge that notion earlier, because why wouldn't you want to increase your profit margin
Hmm.
for a launch by reusing rockets? I mean, to me, from a novice, from someone who's looking outside in but understands basic business principles, it seems like a no-brainer to try and figure that out. Even if you didn't care about a multiplanetary species and that wasn't your ethos, and you were
Hmm.
being driven by, you know, by money alone, it seems like that should happen, and that makes a lot of business sense to try and um, increase the profit margin.
Yeah, I think it's obviously very difficult. So I think the push for a long time, especially with the Cold War, and then all the geopolitical problems of the intervening area years between that. I think the thought was just well, let's just do it the easiest way possible and not really worrying about innovating. That people get complacent no matter what industry you're in. So I might be wrong, but I personally believe that that's kind of what happened.
Especially when you're tied to the government.
Hmm.
I mean, governments, big picture, are not known to be terribly innovative. They're slow moving. It really takes a significant shift to get a government in a particular direction. So if you're a government contractor for aerospace, um, the competition, number one, is not there, and the drive to innovate quickly is not there.
Hmm.
And you know the the antithesis of what we see in old aerospace is what we see in Silicon Valley. Just quick iterations, moving quick, breaking things, and you see a good example is phones and computers. You've got this sort of annual or sometimes biannual iteration of a technology. It
Hmm.
gets just a little bit better every 6 months to 12 months. Um, and 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 so I think that same principle is being applied now to space, and it's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I can't honestly wait for what the future is going to bring for my kids in particular, because I took them to the first Falcon Heavy launch back in 2018 because I saw a shuttle launch as a kid, so it kind of just inspired me from the beginning. But the amount of people that you could see out there at that launch was just ridiculous. There had to have been on the order of 30,000 people out to. I mean, in the space shuttle days, you might have seen that in the first few ones, but from then to now, I mean, you don't see people lining up on the street to watch a rocket launch up until that point. So there are certain companies I think that are really driving the force behind even people being interested in space today.
It's quite remarkable. And if you talk to a baby boomer, they remember as a kid watching watching that program
Hmm.
being developed, and the landing on Mars. And it was always I just every time I talk with someone who's a little bit older than I am, they always refer to those moments as a kid. They remember them, and so I think, as you're talking about as well, for our kids, I think we're in a really wonderful place, a really special place where we can sort of share those similar memories with our children, and our children will look back and say, "Remember when this was in the early stages when we were watching rockets being landed and reused, and remember when you know rockets went to space and traveled to Mars." The one thing that always just is always astonishing to me when I'm watching SpaceX rocket launches. I'm watching them usually on my phone or my TV, and it's
Hmm.
usually being streamed from YouTube or Twitter. And I just think to myself, wow, this is super cool. Like, we'll be able to sort of talk about this, when we're older, and think this is sort of the democratization of space, the beginning of democratization. And it really just the level playing field that anyone can watch it anywhere they're at, in
Hmm.
a car, on the road, in an airport, at home, on any device. And when in the 60s, when these programs were just getting up and running, it was a far more limited way to consume those launches and that content. You had to watch it around a TV or listen to it on the radio. So it is remarkable to see this level playing field happening.
Have you seen or do you have plans to see one in person one day?
I'd love to. Yeah, I had an opportunity. Was it a year ago? Through Tesla's referral program, I got an invite to attend a launch, but I couldn't make it with my schedule. I really would love to. I think it would be a fun experience, and a memorable one. Everyone that I've spoken to who's been at one says you got to do it. It's
Hmm.
to be there in person is surreal.
I definitely recommend it if you can ever, um, do it because watching on the TV and all that is awesome that we can do that, but nothing's like in person. It kind of puts a whole different perspective onto it, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, I got to do it. And I think my kids would probably like it as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome for them. So while we're kind of on that topic of changing, the future here, companies like SpaceX and excuse me, like Rocket Lab I was talking about, are launching rockets, or I'm sorry, launching satellites into orbits, and particularly the Starlink satellites. It's causing kind of a big controversy one way or another. A lot of people believe that it's crowding the night sky and messing up a lot of photography and things like that. But then obviously a lot of other people are for it because it's opening up internet and things on a global scale. Do you have any thoughts kind of one way or another on Starlink?
I do have a few thoughts. I think you could, those people who have that opposition to something like this, you could use that same lens for development of large cities. If imagine if we took that same notion of um, the night sky is going to be polluted with lights, and we shouldn't make a city bigger. We shouldn't develop a city. It's you got to find as best as possible the happy medium. People want comfort, convenience. They want access to things, and as a real estate agent, I think about that as well. Like, through the
Mhm.
lens of development of a city, Denver is a booming real estate market. There's a lot of development and growth. Along with it does come some downsides, right? We have a big problem right now with pollution. There are some ways to sort of attack that, and governments and people are trying to solve that problem. But if you say we can't expand Denver because it's going to bring pollution and it's going to bring a lot of traffic on the highways, I don't think that I think that the advantages of expanding Denver are far better than the disadvantages. And
Mhm.
so you have to find that happy medium. And so with Starlink, there's people who know and follow this stuff far greater than I am. But if I look at it through the lens of an entrepreneur, through the lens of a consumer, it appears like um, the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. And who knows, it may create some challenges, like polluting the night sky, um, for stargazers and space enthusiasts. But is there more upside than downside? I think that's what people have to weigh. It's not black and white. There
Mhm.
is there is gray area there, and you have to find the best solution for the largest amount of people.
Yeah, my thoughts on that are there's probably 100,000 or more pieces of things around the earth. If you look at the photos and the 3D animations, it's just like it almost seems like you shouldn't be able to fly through it to be able to get back to Earth. If something was from afar, but you don't see people talking about that when they're doing stargazing. So I think there's just certain things like anything people attach to because it's popular, and then they just ride that wave of saying, "Oh, this is bad because of this," type deal.
You know what I think it is? I think humans in general have a hard time with change.
Hmm.
They get used to something and they like it, and they don't want to have to adjust the routines or the way of thinking. And so I think that's a lot of why people make a big fuss about things that change. To go back to the example of a growing city, a fast growing city, you could, if you listen to the people who said, I don't want a city to grow because it's going to create traffic and pollution, smog and noise pollution as well, then we wouldn't have a lot of the benefits that a big city offers in terms of convenience. And so change is hard. And change is innovation in particular, like what we're talking about here. It's not it's not, black or white. It's there is some gray area there, and as I said, you have to assess the totality of it and decide, is there more upside than downside? If there's more upside, then it should be considered at least as a potential option.
Yeah, 'cause I think something like Starlink, while we're on that subject, is beneficial because there's probably what 30% of the world's population that has no access to internet. So I mean, if something can give people internet to further their understanding of the world and their intellectual ability to comprehend things, why wouldn't we want to try and further that? Is my argument on that.
Yeah, and it does create new business models.
Hmm.
It creates new wealth, new opportunities, new jobs. And I've often thought, the moment that I started to hear about Starlink, I've often thought about it through the lens of Teslas, the vehicles in particular,
Hmm.
and how, if the iterations of the technology in terms of receivers, a lot of people, my speculation is that the technology will get good enough, the density of internet coverage will get thick enough, and the receivers will get small enough that it will make sense eventually for Tesla to borrow that technology or license out the technology from SpaceX, put the receivers in vehicles, and allow these vehicles to move off of third-party cell suppliers who have spotty coverage, and utilize the technology. There's a few reasons why I think that that's beneficial. One of the driving factors I expect to hear about is autonomy.
Hmm.
And if you have cars that are communicating back to a central servers and teaching a neural net to how to drive, a central brain how to drive,
Hmm.
you need fast transmission, and you need reliable transmission. And as the data volumes, the data sizes increase, I think Tesla's going to look for ways to pull that more in house and be less reliant on third party uh, cell suppliers, and their satellites.
And who knows, it may reduce the amount of repeaters needed throughout a city, which could therefore maybe open up some land because you can't always have something right up against some of these repeaters because of the cell radiation that comes from them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, people often talk about how it can't work because the receivers are too large. But that's today.
Hmm.
Imagine if in the 1980s someone said, we shouldn't make the investment into cellular phones because they're the size of a purse, right? You have to
Hmm.
carry the phone in a bag over your shoulder, and it's just not going to work. We shouldn't do it. And today, we have these phones now that are far more powerful, far smaller, and that is because of what investors and businesses did back in the early 80s with consumer mobile devices.
Yeah, the Apollo program ran off of a computer that has less computation power than your phone that you just showed right there. So it's amazing what we've come to be in this day and age.
It's remarkable. It really is remarkable how far we've come in terms of computing power. And it's we have the world's libraries in our pocket. we
Hmm.
have we have the world's information in our pocket, and maybe soon here in the future in our brains. um, it really is remarkable and astonishing what humanity has been able to do in such a short amount of time.
So right now there's only one company, but let's just kind of make it broader and just say that multiple people are trying this. The whole point to point transfer with rockets instead of planes deal. Do you believe that if that was not just pushed by one company, but multiple people, and they've already done tests of it. Do you think that's something that's viable, or do you think that that is something that will still only be a niche type of?
That's a good question. To be quite honest, when this idea was proposed, was maybe a little bit more skeptical about it. I didn't
Mhm,
necessarily embrace it as something that I was excited about at first take. It there are seemingly some downsides to it. Number one, you've got the the noise
mhm,
of frequent rocket launches. My understanding is that these will be designed to take place in the ocean, or, around the ocean, away from cities if they're happening more frequent like that. And then you have this the speed of travel, is another piece, which I guess is an upside. You get to where you're going faster. I'm not sure. I wonder if there are some other ways to attack that. Obviously, if you can figure out a safe way to get people to their end destinations faster, I think it's going to be great. Will we have some of the same challenges that we see with with commercial air travel, where you increase the amount of travel, you're also increasing the carbon the carbon impact that we see. So I don't know. I think that there's a lot of things to consider there, and I think it's still really in its infancy, and not enough is known about it.
yeah, I think that it'll, even for me, I'm like one of the biggest proponents of, yeah, let's try it, let's do this, if it's something with space. But I think something like that, it'll have to be well documented that it's effective in order for it to really take on.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Because I don't think the normal everyday person will be like, yeah, let me strap myself to a thing that has 2 million pounds of fuel that's going to explode beneath me. That's kind of, even though airplane engines work the same way, just in a different aspect. So,
Yes. Yeah. Again, back to the idea of, um, if there are entrepreneurs who can take the risk, make the investment, improve the business model, great. And it's
mhm.
safe. It's got to be safe. It's got to be safe for people. But I'm sure some people had that criticism about commercial air travel too. Oh, that's dangerous. Think how fast you're going. Think
Mhm.
about the rocket, not the rocket fuel, but the plane fuel, airplane fuel that's right next to you as you're traveling. It's so. But obviously, people today don't think twice about getting on a plane. It's pretty safe when you look
Yep.
at the statistics of it. I think it's even safer to travel in a plane than it is a car in terms of getting into an accident.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much well past what car accidents are right now versus plane accidents. I mean, I think they've even compared it to, you're more likely to be like bitten by an animal in the ocean than you are, to
Yes.
crash on a plane. But,
Yes.
obviously it still has its ups and downs as far as that's concerned.
Yeah.
So I've had this conversation with my two previous guests, and I just wondered your take on this, since like we were talking about before, not like as diving deep into space as I might be, but have you ever had the thought or question raised to you that whether space is real or fake or any of these types of things?
I see people talk about this, and there's the flat earthers, and the conspiracy theorists who say that the lunar landing was fabricated, and that the you know SpaceX launching a car into space was fabricated. And
Hmm.
um, I suppose I understand why people believe that, because it's incredibly technical. It's hard to understand, and few people have experienced it in person themselves.
Hmm.
But um, what's the motivation behind that? I mean, to beat the Russians to Mars or to space. What's the motivation? I think that I think that the the upside of furthering space and space exploration is, I think there's far more motivation to prove a business model there than there is to fabricate it because of what? What reason do you have to do that? To develop a name for yourself that you've done it, notoriety.
Mhm.
If it doesn't exist, why would companies invest so much money into it? I don't know. I mean, it's I I I have thought, when I watch these videos from ISS or from rocket launches, it is kind of hard to believe, but
Mhm.
um, it is also quite impressive. And you know, I don't know. I believe it. I believe it.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that I don't believe that it's there and that it's happening in real time, but I understand why people are skeptical about it because it's highly technical and complex.
Yeah, it is definitely something that if you're not deeply diving into it, then there could be misunderstandings or just things that normal people are, not to say normal, but like are ignorant of, and that just furthers that thought process, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, and with anything like that, it's a lot of uh, it's just being unaware, and making judgments about things from a basis of just not knowing.
So I wanted to, we can finish with a final kind of thought. Here our question here is that we went to the moon back in, the early days of the Apollo program, or mid days of the Apollo program, if you want to be accurate. And now we're trying to go to Mars. Do you think that we should focus more on the moon just because of sheer distance of how close it is? Or do you think we should be pushing past that to go to places like Mars or beyond?
I don't know if I know enough about the benefits of the moon, and I've heard some people say that the moon should be colonized. Uh, I mean, from a proof of concept standpoint, it seems to make sense from an outsider looking in. If you can prove that landing on another place outside of Earth, then yeah, it probably should happen. But colonization of a moon, I don't fully understand the upside there of that.
Mhm.
And maybe you can enlighten me on why people think that should happen.
I think a lot of people believe that the inhospitability of Mars is kind of a downside, and therefore we should focus more on the moon because it takes at best 6 months to get to Mars. It takes 2.5 days to get to the moon, depending on how fast you're going. The environment on the Mars is, can't breathe, but you can't breathe on the moon either. So that's kind of a non existent argument. I think a lot of it is just that it takes so far to get there. It takes so long to get there, and the radiation that you're exposed to, and all that types of stuff. That people believe that we shouldn't even focus on that. Like, just look at the moon and just do that. But I kind of feel like that's almost a regression. That we went to the moon already. Why shouldn't we try and just further, what we could push the human boundaries of technological prowess on?
I mean, if it's private money, let people do what they want. Let people do what they want
Yeah.
with their money. I mean, if it's government money, that's a different thing. I understand
Mhm.
the objection and the criticism there, but if these are private companies, let them do it. And if it's not feasible, then it'll play out. But if it's
Mhm.
feasible, then why not let it happen? Let people succeed or fail, and let it be a free market.
Yeah, I think that we should just push no matter what. I think we should go back to the moon just for research purposes. Have people there that can conduct experiments, and there's even things on the moon we might be able to mine as far as a resource of water or water ice, things like that. But why would we want to shoot for something only because we've been to it in the past and now we want to go again? Like, we haven't ever had somebody on Mars or, Europa or some of the even further things. So why not push to try and go there? Is my thought.
Sure. Yep. Do it. Go for it. If people want to take the risk, why not?
Yeah, I don't think that we should only focus on one thing because that's what we've done. We never would have colonized the United States today if we had just been like, oh yeah, well there's something over there, but it's okay. We don't need to go back.
We're going to
Yeah.
fall off the flat Earth, right? Like
Yeah.
if we sail far enough, we're going to fall off. I mean, someone had to challenge that notion
Hmm.
and take the risk, and I bet that was extremely scary for some people, right? Like
I
I'm sure
imagine.
you
Yeah.
had some scientists who had some calculated understanding. But if you don't know, then you could let fear keep you from that risk, taking that risk, and we wouldn't we wouldn't be talking today, most likely.
Yeah. I mean, even the Apollo landing, they thought when they landed on the moon that the spacecraft was going to sink through the dirt there because they had no idea, the first time anybody had been there. So when he like stepped off, there was actually from what I've read and understood, there was a thought that he might just sink like a few feet into the ground and then you're dead, type thing. So what
Hmm.
we don't understand, I think, like you're talking about before, change is hard. And if we don't understand something, we fear it. And therefore we shouldn't push for it, is some people's thought process.
Yeah, that's why superstitions exist. It's fear of the unknown, and you fill in the gap with things that you think exists, and
Hmm.
sometimes they're not accurate. I've used this example before of, as a kid, falling asleep at night, I would my brain would imagine things that I saw. Is there a monster in the closet? Is there going to be a monster that's going to reach out from underneath the bed and grab my leg and pull me under the bed? Like
Yep.
sometimes the fear is not based in reality, and if we make decisions based off of fear alone, it can hold us back from greater things.
Because if we had stopped after like we were talking about before, the unfortunate shuttle accidents, then we would never have gone, you know, built the space station. We never would have completed it. We never would have had this and that and blah blah. So I think that it's just failure. I don't think should be something that we should fear. I think it should be something, especially with space travel, just be accepted. And that's hard for people to understand because people are going to die, and that's unfortunate. I don't want anybody to ever perish, obviously, but it's going to happen. So we should just kind of accept it and move on.
Hmm. Yeah, agree.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show with me today. Do you have any kind of final thoughts? Anything we could look forward to coming up with you?
Thanks for having me on. First of all, really appreciate it, Michael. Fun to chat about. For me, business and innovation, and I think there's some overlap there with space and the topic of your podcast. So thanks for taking the risk and having me on. Um,
I appreciate you
but
being on.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some things that are coming up? I've been sort of deeply involved locally here with a legislative bill here in Colorado that will open up uh, non-traditional manufacturers selling direct to consumer. We're sort of
Hmm.
50% there. Got through the Senate. Have a hearing today for the House of Representatives, and if it passes the hearing, then it goes to the House floor, and then it gets the final vote, and then if it gets the appropriate support, then it'll get signed into law, which will mean that companies like Rivian and Lucid Motors and Fisker will have access to have physical location sales and service centers here, just like Tesla does, but Tesla's grandfathered in to an older law. So I've been working quite a bit on that. I've got, in terms of content on the YouTube side, I'm putting quite a bit. I'm ready to create a video around this Tesla's upcoming battery day. To me, that's a really exciting one, and been sort of following the battery technology here for the last 12 months, and I think there's going to be some really large things to look forward to, and will sort of benefit the entire automotive industry. I think when Tesla reveals their technology that they've been working on to drive down costs of batteries. So those are a couple of high level things that are top of mind to me, that people who follow me closely will see in the next 7 to 14 days.
Okay, well, it sounds like a lot of interesting things are coming up, and I'm looking forward to all the battery day and all those things. I'll definitely be watching your video on that.
Awesome.
So, again, I appreciate you being on, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation about space.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on again. Have a good day.
You too.